Hi, I'm Stanley Bentu from First Wave TV, and welcome to Nuts and Bolts. Now, I have a question. Now, if you want to build a nation that is prosperous, technologically advanced, organized, and developed, where do you start from? Do you simply study their technology and do your best to imitate what they do? Now, that sounds to me like the fastest way to fall flat on your face, and may explain why, despite our best efforts, many African countries, Nigeria inclusive, struggle with development issues. The true secret weapon to sustain development is education. And not just any education, basic education. A nation's development relies considerably on access of its population to educational institutions. Access to primary education, regardless of class or caste or income, levels the social playing field. You can practically predict the heights of development that a country will reach by inspecting its primary and secondary schools. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of this problem.
The state of Nigeria's public primary and secondary schools are deplorable. This problem cuts across all aspects, ranging from dilapidated infrastructure, shortage of teaching aids, poor wash facilities in schools where any exist at all, and security threats. Despite Nigeria's faltering security situation and repeated attacks on schools right down to kidnap of school children, most private schools remain unfenced and without security guards or early warning systems and protocols of any kind. The Federal Capital Territory FCT, as it's often referred to, is the seat of the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Abuja is the capital of Nigeria. All federal establishments, offices and parastatals are headquartered here in Abuja. All major companies and establishments are represented in the FCT because the country is run and managed from there. Abuja is designed to be a model city not only for Nigeria, but the entire continent of Africa. There are sections of the city marked for commercial purposes, recreation, offices, motor parks, administration, residential quarters, banking and finance, and just about anything else in between. The city is modeled after modern cities obtainable in any developed countries like the USA. There are sidewalks, pedestrian crossings, blocks of houses, service roads, overhead bridges, metro transit buses, modern restaurants and fast food joints, parks and recreational facilities scattered all over the city, hotel chains to name just a few of them.
And yet, in the midst of all this wealth and opulence, one would be shocked to find the squalor in which public primary and secondary schools operate.
In 2004, the Nigerian government responded to this growing problem by establishing the Universal Basic Education Commission, simply known as UBEC. UBEC is the product of a law created to provide free and compulsory universal basic education to all Nigeria's children. The idea was that, if done right, the agency will help the country eradicate illiteracy, ignorance and poverty, as well as to stimulate and accelerate national development, political consciousness and national integration. UBEC is concerned with early childhood care and education, CECCE, primary education and junior secondary education. One of the major goals of the UBE program is to ensure that all children, regardless of ethnicity, religion, class or gender, will have access to quality basic education. How is UBEC funded? Here is how it works. The federal government of Nigeria provides 2% of the money in its consolidated revenue account, which is exclusively reserved for basic education. Then states are to provide 50% of whatever fund is approved in that respect. As counterpart funds, only then will they be able to access the funds reserved by the federal government. So, why has UBEC not had the transformative effects that TED Fund has had in the tertiary education sector? It all comes down to the fact that many states have been unable to get access to these funds because they have not paid their share of 50%. Even when states and FCT manage to make these payments, they are not consistent. 26 states and the Federal Capital Territory have failed to access the sum of 33.6 billion naira earmarked for basic education by UBEC as of February 2022. According to the Executive Secretary of the Commission, Dr. Hamid Boboyi, each state receives an average of 1.5 billion naira for funding of basic education from UBEC every year, which adds up to 3 billion naira if the state pays its share. But these funds are even now lying idle because many states fail to pay their matching 50%. UBEC estimates that the amount of money currently lying idle is over 18 billion naira. This means the FCT has a possible 505 million naira that could be spent on basic education. You can double that when you add the counterpart funding.
Now, this is not a new problem. Poor funding of education has plagued Nigeria for many, many years. And despite the fact that Abuja is one of the fastest growing cities in Africa with a growth rate of 9% per annum, according to the Africa Cities Consortium, Nigeria and the FCT itself has never met the 15 to 20% international benchmark for budgetary allocation to education. Now, when you consider that the current birth rate of Nigeria in 2022 is 36.4 births per 1,000 people, you can imagine the multiplier effect of Abuja's 9% growth rate and what it means for how much money we should be investing in education.
Dr. Boboyi feels frustrated by the poor outcomes in basic education delivery despite billions of naira given to states and the FCT for intervention programs every year. Where does the money go? The UBEC chief said that about 50% of schools lack basic furniture, forcing pupils to sit on the floor to take lessons. The National Personnel Audit (NPA) carried out by the Commission showed that Nigeria currently has a deficit of about 43,456 classrooms, indicating a limited capacity for access. Limited classroom spaces have not only contributed to the high number of out-of-school children, but accounted for why some still learn under trees and dilapidated buildings. There is no doubt that we need more money for education, but how can we make impact even with the current resources available? Let's take the wash problem. According to the FCT Education Management Information System and the Federal Capital Territory Universal Education Board, there are 612 primary schools, 161 junior secondary schools in the FCT, catering to about 331,514 students and pupils. By international standards, one toilet head is to serve 6 people. But if for cost-cutting purposes we set out standards at one toilet head to serve 10 students, we will need to build 33,151 toilets across all schools to adequately serve all our students.
Giving a background of the inconsistent behavior of the regional governments, the Commission says that between 2005 and 2017, the 36 states and the FCT paid all the counterpart funds. The FCT was able to meet all of its obligations in 2018, 2019, and 2020. But in 2021, UBEC revealed that only 8 states, Bauchi, Benue, Edo, Gombe, Jigawa, Katsina, Nasarawa, and Taraba, lodged their counterpart funds for the full year, while the others, including the FCT, owed counterpart funds for the final quarter of 2021. The amount owed by the federal capital for the last quarter of that year was a little over 151 million naira. The chairman of the governing board of UBEC, Professor Adamu Usman, had accused sub-governments of abdicating their responsibility to fund basic education. Now, he said that the states did not appear enthusiastic about funding basic education because they often failed to pay their matching grants. Now, beyond the inconsistencies in the counterpart payments, where has the money that has been invested gone? If the FCT has expended 3 billion naira every year on intervention projects in its public basic education institutions, where is the evidence? Where is the impact?
We dispense maybe billions. A state gets a minimum of about 1.5 billion. It brings 1.5 billion. At least 3 billion will be available on a yearly basis. But then, at the end of the day, you start wondering, is these the monies and the resources that are going to these states and to the agencies that are implementing basic education? How much of it is really going down to the level of the classroom and making a difference in teaching and learning?
Do we have the right priorities for development? The National Assembly makes laws for the FCT and should be the watchdog over the FCT administration. But its spending habits don't seem that much more prudent. Back in 2017, the Nigerian Senate splurged 1.2 billion naira to import vehicles for its members. Nigerians were outraged that this happened in the light of more urgent needs. At the time, Senator Sabi Abdullahi, who was its spokesperson, tried to justify this expenditure.
Even the Senate in itself, in procurement of vehicles, we've seen the Senate buy Toyota, SUVs, and all of that. So it seems almost a contradiction.
It's not a contradiction. I think let's understand one thing. What we are trying to say here is this. Look, you talk about vehicles. We are in your studio here. Tell me which of them is produced in Nigeria. Everything we are using here, how many of the percentage is used in Nigeria?
The vehicles in the studio?
No. In this your studio, the items we are using, how many of them, or how many of the technology?
No, a lot of the technology here can't be made
you see,
here.
look,
but we have vehicles that can be made and are being made in Nigeria.
Let's face reality. There are some of these things that can be made in Nigeria, but based on what you want to achieve, if the quality is not up to what you want, I'm sure you will definitely prefer to do something different. In terms of the issue of procurement, I will make it very clear. Even these vehicles we talked about, they are not supplied by foreign companies. They are supplied by Nigerians who are doing legal business, and within that context, they follow exactly the laws as set up in this country. The issue is simple. If we have options, if the vehicle, our, what do they call it, automotive industry, if we have not killed it before now, it will have been a different ballgame. And I want to believe, if we want to really aid this country,
we have an automotive industry that is resurging.
Yes, it's resurging.
It's re-emerging.
And that is exactly the point. And so with all of these things...
And it's re-emerging in a way that when you consider the average spending power of the everyday Nigerian, they will not be able to get it on track quickly enough. Government would have to make a massive investment and can do it in two ways. Government can decide to offer that industry a bailout or a loan, and we know how that is most likely to go, or government can become the biggest buyer of that industry, which will be very difficult if government itself says, okay, no, well, my taste is more of the foreign as opposed to this.
No, I will only talk about anti-corruption when this issue is resolved, as far as I'm concerned, because you cannot just bring something and leave Nigerians with half-baked information, and at the end of the day, we've not achieved the aim. What I'm trying to say here is that if you look at the totality of things that are being purchased, the budget, the national budget, if you look at the capital budget, how much is it? And how much of the percentage, for example, even if we are buying foreign vehicles, but what about the other large percentage of things that we will purchase within the context of what is happening in our economy? I think that's the point we shouldn't lose. Why should we trivialize it to the extent of looking at a small percentage of what has happened within that? And like I said, this is work in progress.
But just 2 years later, a repeat of that spending spree saw the budget for vehicles balloon to 5.5 billion naira. There is little doubt that basic education, which is one of the most essential ingredients for progress, will continue to suffer if it continues to take a backseat to other matters and corruption, complemented with poor judgment over what is really important, is allowed to persist. Now let me know what you think about how we can get the FCT and other state governments to make spending on basic education top priority. Leave your comments in the comment section below. Now if you like this video, then subscribe to First Wave TV and ring the bell to be notified every time we release a new edition of Nuts and Bolts.